Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And I'm Pops.
Pops bringing it back with the Khalil Mack heyday of the Bears defense with the 52 jersey. Also the double doink for all those who forget. It's that's prime Bears. It's great defense, but at the same time, how are we going to absolutely butcher this game? We have Devin Hester take the opening kickoff back years before, only to lose to Peyton, with Rex Grossman.
As I say, if it's any indication, at least you know you're going to the playoffs now.
Exactly. And we got it made.
Well, I hear that you're having a little bit of a drama, Maul, with Kyle Shanahan.
The NFL's having drama, which, my brother's a Cowboys fan, and, so naturally he hates anything 49ers, and my dad's a 49ers fan. So having Christian McCaffrey on his team, on a Monday night game, week 1, with zero indication that he wasn't going to play is, I'm sure he's not the only one that is a little peeved about the situation, especially since he didn't handcuff and have Jordan Mason. So that's his fault.
I did see a video of some dude reacting. I think he works for one of the bigger sports companies. I think it was Barstool or something. He had Christian McCaffrey, and some dude walks in. They go, "Did you see?" He's like, "See what?" He's like, "The Christian McCaffrey's out." And he gets on his phone, sees it, and just spikes his phone.
I mean, there's so many angles you can take on this. This is a classic Shanahan move. It feels very Shanahan-esque. It feels almost a little Bill Belichick-esque, if you ask me as well. Bill used to do stuff in and outside the game that were, we'll say at the time, within the rules, but then usually quickly got, the rule book changed because of it. Just trying to gain an advantage, right? And I don't know. Who knows? Telling the other team that McCaffrey's not starting, I don't know what kind of advantage you're gaining there. Because when he doesn't start, you know what I mean? And Jordan, it's you were planning for McCaffrey all game, right? So if anything, your defense is amped up, we gotta stop this dude. So I don't know the advantage, but ultimately I think it comes down to the NFL. The NFL and the media need to come up with some situation where they got to get better fidelity on this kind of stuff. And I get it. Shanahan's going to go, "I don't care about your fantasy team." Yeah, I get that. And he doesn't care whether individual teams are winning or losing, but the NFL absolutely cares about people's fantasy teams because that's bringing a lot of attention and a lot of money to the game. So, I
would argue this has the one topic that you're missing. Is fantasy important? Yes. You want to know what's way more important that NFL's been all over? Betting. Can you imagine if I'm laying money down thinking that Christian McCaffrey's going to play?
There's a lot of aspects to this whole thing. And again, ultimately the NFL is going to have to put some rule in place that's going to also make the media more liable, because a lot of back in the day, they used to have beat writers, that would follow around the team and they were in and out of they were covering all the stuff. And nowadays, especially because social media and technology has advanced, a lot of these guys I feel are in the back pockets of the team, and they're not necessarily reporting everything they see, right? Because for such a high profile name, and nobody had any indication all the way up until it got released by Adam Schefter. Dude, that's so unacceptable on so many different levels for everybody. And then even worse is the fact that they're really throwing Jordan Mason under the bus now about oh, well, he didn't know, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's on him. And dude, the guy was so happy that he just put up, over a dub in his first game and all this stuff. And sorry, dude, he told the truth. You know what I mean? How you get mad at him for that? It's just BS all the way around.
Which I understand how your brother feels because, like you're saying, like especially for the poor guy Mason running the football, it's like Shanahan knew, like I guarantee you, Lynch knew, like if the NFL really is like fed up with it, what they'll do is they'll suspend him for a game. Like, hey, you don't want your best signal caller making plays, like in the. I will say the NFL usually does a pretty good job about like in terms of suspending guys when it's I think back to Sean Payton, it was like, hey, you try to intentionally hurt a guy, you're done for a whole year, like without pay. Kick rocks. Like if the NFL really wants to send a message, they have the ability to. We'll just see if they end up doing that. But for this week, go ahead.
Well, I was also going to say, like, on the topic of like getting it out into the news, you were talking about the beat reporters, like even Adam Schefter, like there's some way that they go about doing it now that is very, like one-sided. Like there's only one way that we're going to do this. Like for instance, he's always a guest on the McAfee show, and they hear the phone going off in the background. They're like, "Hey, Schefter, you got some news to tell us? Got some news to tell us?" And it's ESPN. It's ESPN. It's like, why can't you tell the McAfee show? It's ESPN. It's who you work for, but yet he still can't tell them what's on his phone.
Yeah, it's a problem to say the least. But there's nothing. The NFL sort of that classic meme of like the Sandra Bullock. It's just they don't care what is not a problem for them right now. So, but on to week 2. So how I was planning on doing this is we'll talk about the individual games that are being played this week. We'll sort of reference back to the games that already occurred, but instead of breaking down week 1 games, we'll just sort of talk about them in perspective of this week's games, which Thursday night tonight, we got the Bills going to the Dolphins. Miami Police Department should be out in full force guarding the parking lot, especially if there's any Buffalo Bill police officer fans. I think Jacksonville, had some major side bets with Schefter that no one talked about last week. But Miami's favored 2.5. You had the Bills coming off a win against the Cardinals, although they struggled in some aspects. They got down early, also allowed the first kickoff of this new formation that we've seen from the Cardinals. And then the Dolphins, also in a similar position, get down to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Luckily, ETN fumbles, a few other things go their way, mainly Trevor Lawrence is being mid, finds a way to blow another game, and they end up beating Jacksonville. So to you guys first, what's your initial thoughts on the Thursday night game?
Yeah, it's always a good game anytime you're playing these divisional games. I said kind of at the top of the season, I think the Bills are going to be a little overrated this year, just from they've been this kind of perennial powerhouse for the last 5-ish years with Josh Allen, and they have no talent around him this year. I think he's dealing with like a non-throwing hand injury. It's nothing serious. Like he was on the injury report, but he's obviously playing. But yeah, struggling with the Cardinals isn't a good start. Not to say that the Dolphins struggling with the Jags isn't a good start as well. I just think from like a talent standpoint, the Dolphins got a one-up on them. They're at home. That gives them another one-up on them. The one negative for the Dolphins, I think, is their running back situation right now. Mostert's already ruled out. Achane is game time decision with an ankle. However, their backup is Jeff Wilson, which he's kind of proven in multiple systems and multiple times that like he can handle that load. He's not as explosive as Achane, but he can handle being that number 1 back if they needed him tonight. So I think there's just more leaning towards the Dolphins, especially only on a 2.5 spread. Like that's a field goal. Like I don't think that's a problem for them. They should be able to get that done.
I think for me, what I go back to is if you guys remember last year when they played this game, it was like week 4, I believe, maybe week 5. And we're like, man, this Dolphins team, they've got an offense. They're rolling. They put up 70 against the Broncos. And then they went into Buffalo and they got punched in the mouth. I mean, I'm looking last year, it was 48-20. And it's just like, this was that game that we looked at too, and we're like, if you throw off his first read, then, he's questionable at best. Like, you don't know where he's going to go with that ball, and that was really exposed. Now, with the secondary that the Bills have this year, I mean, that they've had for the last couple of years, are we going to see them throw fits for Tua? But, hey, if you don't have a run game, like, the only thing you really got to worry about is Tua being able to throw a Tyreek, and, I mean, there's plenty of answers to always have someone over the top of him and try to make it go to the second guy. Like I look at Bill Belichick the other day. He said when I had Darrelle Revis, I wouldn't even put him on the number one guy. I'd put him on the number two guy, and then I put
And then double
two guys
team the
over
number
the
one guy.
double team the number one dude. And so like you could maybe see a little bit of that out of Jalen Ramsey tonight on top of Waddle, and see just what happens there.
Yeah, it will be.
Sorry, Jalen Waddle's on that defense. Sorry, maybe DeMar. Put DeMar over the top of Waddle. We'll see what happens. Your favorite player.
It's gonna be the second time he's died in a game. If that happens, just heads up. For me, it's more of a test of the Bills' defense tonight than anything else. Like, we sort of know the Bills' offense. It's Josh Allen. Like, he proved it last week. For as bad as that team is offensively, Josh Allen found a way to win the game, which has sort of been its mantra. It's like 3rd and 9. If I can't find anybody open, I'm going to run for it. Like, he's extremely undervalued from that position in terms of, I think, his ability to go run downfield and somehow not get hurt like Anthony Richardson. For both guys are sort of similar body builds, but for me tonight, I lean towards the Dolphins just because if the Bills are giving up that many points to Kyler Murray and that offense of James Conner, like, yes, Miami's running game's a little hurt, but when you look at the other talent they have, it's hard not to go with the Dolphins. But the main question from the night's game is this going to finally break the trend of terrible Amazon Prime football games?
We'll see.
If they score more than 40 points.
I'd say at least it's not the Broncos.
Oh my gosh, or the Jets. Bringing you hot tonight, Jets versus Bears. You're like, oh, I hate this game,
Great
but
game.
I can't.
Great game.
No, it's not. It was never a great game.
It's a warm glass of milk and a nap by halftime.
Then on Sunday, we got the Raiders going to the Ravens. You got the Ravens coming off, one toe away, or as one of my favorite memes said, if Dion was the guy catching it, it would have been a clear inside the line catch with missing all those toes against the Raiders, who really struggled against the Chargers there at the end. What are your guys' initial thoughts? Baltimore right now is a 9-point favorite.
Yeah, it makes sense. For the line,
they take it easy.
Yeah, the Raiders they don't have a whole lot going for them. I think Minshew in a new system, he's getting used to some guys. The fact that this isn't a knock on Brock Bowers, but the fact that he was like one of the leading target shares, coming in as like the second tight end, just goes to show that like they're just missing some sync, between the team. I don't think they're going to turn it around on this Ravens defense by any stretch of the imagination. And the Ravens gave the Chiefs everything they had, so it should be an easy win for the Ravens.
I tell you what, though, that defensive line in the first half for the Raiders, like before they got tired, you're like, dude. I mean, they got Wilkins, they got Crosby. These dudes are playing, and then they just got tired because the offense isn't moving the ball, so they're on the field the whole entire game, and the ground game of the Chargers was just able to take over. But like we already talked about, I don't see after the matchup. I mean, we saw a playoff game week 1 between the Chiefs and the Ravens. It came down to the wire. Lamar misses that throw to Zay, and then obviously we know the call of Isaiah's toe being out of bounds. Like I don't see the Baltimore Ravens struggling against the Raiders at all.
I mean, I'm looking at the Raiders rushing. Zamir White had 13 carries for 44 yards, and Madison had 5 carries for 19 yards. It was just their inability to run the football, which is sort of combined. We were talking about it last week of Minshew. Last year, it's sort of this like bias, and I'm definitely going to have Maul talk about this when we get to the Bengals, because he brought up a good point that I was like, God, I need to hear that. Is like we look at Minshew and we're like, oh, look at what he did last year with the Colts. And it's like we forget that like all the years prior to Minshew, like he had not been that guy that he was with the Colts. And it was like, why was he that good with the Colts? It was like Colts gets a brand new head coach who had transformed the Eagles offense. The Eagles offense without him doesn't look good. Now Minshew without this guy again, he's looking like the same old Gardner Minshew, which I feel like, this game and the next game that we're about to talk about with the quarterbacks, like I feel like Minshew is just on a ticking time clock before they sub in O'Donnell, because at some point you got to sit back and go, yeah, he's not our guy, which we sort of knew going into the season. This was more like a doorstop before they go
he's
out and
like
draft
the
somebody.
new Ryan Fitzpatrick, like clearly talented, never quite the guy that you really want to like hang the hat on long term, but like has a lot of swag and gets people excited in the near term. You know what I mean? He's like you said, he's that perfect kind of plug and play of like, we're clearly not trying to win the Super Bowl this year. We're just trying to minimize some damage and maybe, win a few games, in the process. And then, we'll kind of find one from there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think you said it before too. Like, he played under Shane Steichen for a year in Philadelphia, so he had 2 years, with Shane Steichen from Philly to Indy, so it kind of helped him out, to be in that system and to understand, what was going to be asked of him. And I mean, we saw what Getsy did with Chicago Bears offense last season and Justin Fields. I just don't see, that Raiders offense really changing things around.
Yeah, just some fantasy plugs here. Talk on the wire here. Zamir White versus Madison. Like, Zamir White was the clear number one back going into the season. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, is it going to just go right back to a back by committee kind of thing? Because Madison did do better than Zamir White, but I think Madison's also proven that he's not really able to handle being the main guy ever. Devontae didn't do a whole lot in week one. He was open a lot, but again, I think Minshew was missing him there. So that may be something that they want to work on. And then from the Ravens standpoint, Henry was kind of held quiet in that opening game. Not surprising to me, just because, again, I've talked about why I thought Henry wasn't going to do super well in that offense. And then, like you already mentioned, Pops, with the Raiders defensive line, who knows what that does to the Ravens run game as far as shutting down Henry, and letting Lamar either throw the ball more, or they got to wait until that defensive line gets tired before Henry really starts getting going.
For sure. The next game that we're going to talk about is the story of two highly overpaid mid quarterbacks. We've got Deshaun Watson and the Browns going to Jacksonville playing Trevor Lawrence. For me, I feel like this is a ticking time bomb for Watson, sort of the other guy that I was talking about. Like, if he goes out and looks like he did against the Cowboys versus the Jags, like, I feel like we're just a game or two from seeing Jameis Winston enter the picture. This sort of science experiment, I guess, by some sort of the imagination, I feel has run its course. Like, I think everyone was like, okay, year one, Watson's knocking off the rust. But now, yet again, we're seeing the same product out of Watson. That I did want to bring up and let Maul talk about this first, the Brady thing. What Brady said about Watson, which once you hear this, you're not going to be able to unhear it.
Yeah, so this is all conjecture. I don't know if he actually said it, because this was like through word of mouth. I've heard it that they said Brady said it. The story goes, though, that the reason the Browns were so bad, like with Deshaun, is that he's not really comfortable running an NFL style offense. Like, he can't. Whether it's, capacity to remember the playbook, or know where people are going, whatever it is. So they are trying to implement kind of a college style offense for Deshaun to run in the NFL, and obviously that doesn't work very well, so the Browns look terrible. And then, which you're kind of like, whatever, I don't know, but the main behind the scenes was that there's a reason why Flacco was able to come in and immediately, like, oh wow, the Browns are good. It's because Flacco can run an NFL style offense, and all of a sudden you're running an NFL style offense in the NFL as opposed to a college style offense. Yeah, well, no kidding, your offense looks a lot better. You know what I mean? So, and again, it's this whole like Deshaun. We gave him some credit. It's like the same Trevor Lawrence thing. We gave him credit because he won a natty at Clemson. He comes out as this high recruit, goes to the Texans. He doesn't really do anything with the Texans, but he himself looks like he's having good seasons. But we forget he was with peak D-Hop. You know what I mean? Like, anybody could throw the ball in the size of a barn door, and D-Hop's going to catch it. You know what I mean? So now all of a sudden he doesn't have those guys, and now he's trying to run a college style offense. Like, no wonder they're struggling, dude.
Yeah, I mean, Will Levis looked good there for a week, throwing up the D hop. So it's that
Yeah.
I feel like that point's completely valid. On the other side, you sit back and you look at Jacksonville to give up 14 points to Miami. I mean, Etienne's fumble hurt huge in more than one way for fantasy owners. Just you're a yard from going into the end zone and you fumble. This has sort of been the Jags like mantra though. Like you look back at last season, they fold the last few weeks of the NFL season to give up the division lead. It's a good chance for Jacksonville to rebound. The only worry it's whose defense plays better. That's really the question of I put more faith in Lawrence than I do Watson, which is why I like the Jags in the game. But I almost feel like the total for this game right now, Vegas has got it 41.5. Like I would be shocked if it gets above 30. Like I just don't see that type of offense coming out of either team against these two defenses this week.
Yeah, I mean, being as high on the Dolphins as we are, that we just talked about with the Bills, like if Etienne scores that touchdown, I think the Jags win the game, honestly. You know what I mean? Like they didn't look super impressive to me, but they looked good enough to win against a good football team, right? Now, you give a good football team like Miami any glimmer of hope, and they are a good football team, so they're able to come back and take advantage of it. But I think the Jags just need to just stay on the steady road that they're on and just play that level of football, and the Browns will implode on themselves.
Yeah, the Browns, they've still got that fantastic defense, but I mean, Dallas was able to give them fits all week last week. And I think, again, it came down to, the offense never being able to produce anything. To caveat what you said about Deshaun's ability for his mental capacity, I also think we're not being told the true story about his shoulder. Like, I think we're at a Cam Newton situation where he just can't throw the ball more than 15 yards. Like, in my personal opinion, it lingered all year last year. That's why he went out. He was going to come back late in the season. They're like, oh, wait, the shoulder's still lingering. And guess what? This season, the shoulder's still lingering. He's not throwing in training camp. Like, all this stuff is still coming out and it's still there. And it's just like, the Browns are just dumping money into this dude and getting absolutely nothing in return. And I mean, I'm ready for Jameis to come in. I think maybe not be the same success that Flacco had, but I definitely think the sooner they do it, the better they'll set themselves up for playoff contention. Because Deshaun, I mean, maybe he blew it out rushing all the time down in Houston as well, because he did run the ball quite frequently down in Houston, and we're just not seeing that out of him here in Cleveland. So it's hard to say.
You know what's really good for hurt shoulders?
What's that?
Massages. Can't go get one. So, that's what happens. The next game we'll talk about two teams coming off a loss. One team really got shellacked and the other team really blew it to your Chicago Bears. We got the Jets going to the Titans. Right now, the Jets are a -4. My initial take from the game, I liked what Maul told me in a text, which was Rodgers looked good against San Francisco. Like when you take a look at hurt quarterbacks coming back, especially like comparing him and Cousins, like Rodgers was putting in the breadbasket. He had Lazard that couldn't catch. Just there was moments in that game that it could have been a lot closer. I still think San Francisco dominated New York, especially on the defensive side of New York. Like they could not stop the run, and it was pretty concerning for me that there was no defensive adjustments. I know me and Maul were talking throughout the game. Like a lot of times you just saw like two defensive linemen in for the Jets. And it was like, and San Francisco's like, hey, if you want to line up like that, we're going to run it. Like, good luck. And New York never made a change. The Titans defense, I feel like for as bad as I sort of thought the Titans would suck, the defense is good. Like,
yeah, it is.
They gave Chicago all they wanted. And the only thing that bailed out Chicago was that defense and special teams. Like, if anybody but Will Levis had been on the other side of the football, the Titans probably give CW a loss. And I sit back and I look at the mistakes CW made, especially with not getting rid of the football. The Jets defense, like I got the Jets better than -4. I'm surprised, honestly. The Jets aren't double-digit favorites in this game just because you got a rookie quarterback, Rodgers, and them coming off a loss. Like, I don't see how the Jets don't win this game.
Yeah, I think this is one of those like double overreactions of everybody was real high on the Jets. And I think all three of us included were kind of expecting maybe some type of regression from the Niners. So when you watch that game and then the Niners kind of clearly dominated, it makes this like, you start doubting yourself of like, oh, maybe the Jets aren't that good. When in reality, I do think like the Jets are fine. Rodgers looked good. And again, I still think the defense was okay. They didn't make the adjustments that we would have liked to have seen. But I mean, we have to remember like that it's still the Niners. Like the Niners offensive line is stacked, right? Like there's a reason Christian McCaffrey gets so many yards and so much production every year. Oh, and by the way, even further that like when you can bring in a guy like Jordan Mason and him get somewhat the same type of production, that's because the Niners are winning in the trenches. You know what I mean? So yes, they made the Jets look bad, but let's be honest, like they made it to the Super Bowl last year. Like they're a good team. So I think this is like that double overreaction of like, it's easy to just go, oh, Jets are same old Jets. They still suck. But I think they looked a lot better than what people are giving credit for just because they got dominated by a very, very good team in the Niners.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, Brees Hall, has been fantastic for the Jets, and the 49ers were able to hold them for, less than 70 yards. Like, when you can't get that balance going for an offense, like, you already know pretty much what's going to happen. Aaron's going to drop back and throw it, and, he just didn't have quite the success. Like, yes, the accuracy was there, but he was not able to, convert when he needed to keep the ball moving.
They also dropped a lot of balls on him.
That too, exactly.
And Brees fumbled like early in the game. It just the times that New York had an opportunity in the first half to sort of be like, hey, no, like we have a good chance to stay in this game and possibly pull ahead, get a win. They kept shooting themselves in the foot a lot during that game.
Yeah, and kind of same thing with like the Jets and the Niners. Like I brought up the same thing with the Cowboys. Like I think y'all both had the Browns winning that game, and I brought it up with like why I had the Cowboys winning the game was because I get it. Like it's not exciting for them to not make any moves and to just do like essentially absolutely nothing in the offseason. And you're like, they didn't get better. Got it. But at the same time, like they were like an 11-5 team last year. You know what I mean? Or you can fact check me on that. They were pretty close to
12-5.
Yeah, 12-5. There you go. So it's just like I get it. They didn't like do anything in the offseason, but at the same time, like they're the same team they were last year, and that's still a pretty good team.
For sure. And I mean, you're just talking about the Niners. That's the next game up. We got the Niners going to the Vikings. The Vikings, I got to give Sam Darnold credit. Look good. Yeah. I get it was against the Giants.
Called them Ghostbusters, dude. He got rid of them demons.
He passed them on to Danny Dimes because that man ain't seeing nothing. I mean,
oh my goodness.
Which I sent you guys the stat. There's only 2 teams. We'll get to those 2 teams later in this that didn't score a touchdown, one of which was the Giants, couldn't score against the Vikings, and the other was Steelers, but they still somehow beat the Falcons with just field goals. In this game, I know on the Monday night game, they'd already sort of, Schefter came out and said that they don't expect McCaffrey to start, which at the beginning of the game, you're like, ooh, maybe Minnesota, like, how is this going to affect him? And then the game happened. You're like, no, San Francisco's going to be fine. Like, I expect them to put it on the Vikings pretty well. We'll see how. I think this will be a really good test for Darnold, just to see like what type of quarterback is he? Is he going to start seeing ghosts again? Can he at least keep the Vikings competitive, or is it going to be like Bryce Young against the Saints last week? That's my initial take going in, but I got San Francisco. They're -5.5.
Yeah, I agree that San Francisco is going to handle this game as well. Probably not as well as the Ravens will be against the Raiders, but kind of similar fashion. You can see it getting ugly quickly. But the one thing that is, to bring up, if you remember last year before Kirk got hurt, this was like that Monday night game of, hey, what Kirk Cousins are we going to see? Are we going to see the normal Kirk that sucks, or are we going to see a Kirk that finally can win in primetime? And they ended up winning. So they did beat the 49ers last year. Granted, there were a couple 49ers that were hurt, but here we are again with, C-Mac possibly being out or probably being out. And there's still the door open depending on purely how Sam Darnold's going to play. And Sam not getting the good reps. I mean, he had reps in Carolina, but let's be honest, that was just god awful. I can see Uh, I could see there be marginal success for the Vikings in this game, but overall, San Francisco is going to take it.
Yeah, so last year, like what you're talking about, remember the Niners came off that big victory against the Cowboys. It was like this huge statement win. And then I think they followed up with like 3 or 4 straight losses. So who knows? Like you might get that same type of there. It was week 1, Monday night versus the Jets. Everybody's high on the Jets. They get this big emotional victory of like, we're still who we are. And who knows, maybe the Vikings surprise. I think going back if a little bit too, like if anything, the Vikings really are the beneficiaries of this Christian McCaffrey news. One, because they don't have to face Christian McCaffrey, but that could be a reason why the Jets did so poor in the run game, right? Like they come in thinking we got to stop McCaffrey, and then all of a sudden McCaffrey's out. They're thinking, shoot, we don't have to stop the run now because it's not McCaffrey back there, and then they get torched for 126 or whatever it was by Mason. So if anything, now the Vikings have seen that and they're not going to be caught off guard and kind of make the adjustments already, going into the game.
I think the thing too we got to make note of is who gets to London first. Because they're trying to do this statistic of, does this really matter of who shows up to London first and gets into that rhythm? I didn't realize we were playing a London game this early, but just looked it up and they're playing overseas. So, good luck to the Vikings.
Talking about a team that needs luck, you got the Panthers getting a home game of which you can go to for $1.80 against the Los Angeles Chargers. Harbaugh right now has got them at a -6 favorite. I feel like that's a conservative number. I feel like Vegas just doesn't want to lose money by, giving the Chargers even more points on that. The total for the game is only 39.5. I think the only thing for the Chargers of why they're not a bigger favorite is Harbaugh really likes to run the football, and the Saints really torched them passing, especially early. They took their, I get Carr only had 200 yards. He did have 3 touchdowns, had a 60-yard bomb on the first drive of the game, and they really pumped the brakes from that standpoint on that. And their defense had a lot of turnovers, so they were working with a short field for most of the night. I sit back and I look at this, and it's hard not to pick the Chargers. It's one of those games that you sort of are like, sort of like last week versus the Bengals and the Pats. It's like, except now I know who the Panthers are. They're still the same team from last year. And I have to sort of believe them. Like until I see improvement out of the Panthers, there's nothing in me that can sit back and be like, yep, they're going to win a game this year.
If you look at all like the preseason power rankings, I don't think the Panthers were like everybody's 32. And again, it's one of those like people, you just like to change things up. Like you have this natural, affinity to like, yeah, that's boring. Like they were the worst team last year. They have to have improved. But to me, they're like the opposite of Georgia in college. It's like until someone can prove that they can beat Georgia, I don't believe it. And until the Panthers can prove that they can beat anybody, like I don't believe it. So
it's true. Yeah. It's funny because we were all texting that group chat, like, and I was telling Holly about it. I was like, hey, sweets. Like towards the end of the season, I guarantee you the Panthers go 0-14. That last home game, me and the boys may just all go just to say we live that sweet life for $100 each. But who knows? All right, the next game, which I do find pretty interesting just because of last week, Seahawks go to New England. Seattle right now is -3.5. If there was one thing that I pulled from the Patriots win over the Bengals is that Mayo, the defense is there. Like they have a very well-coached defense. I go back to sort of Maul's point of like history has always shown something. Like we've always known that Jacoby Brissett is a good quarterback. Like I think the last few years being on like a terrible Washington franchise and other teams that he's been a part of, like has sort of diminished that in our minds. Like, oh no, they were a bad football team. They lost a bunch of games, which I know Pops brought out week 1 with his like record overall as a starter. But at the same time, like Brissett's like, he's played on a bunch of terrible teams. It's not that he's a bad quarterback. He usually just doesn't have anyone around him. So I sit back and I look at this game. I know Seattle's favored, but it's hard not to sort of lean into the Patriots a little bit on this game just because like they showed more than I thought they would. I get that Cincinnati didn't look great. Seattle has a better offense, but at the same time, it's still Geno Smith on the other side. Like Gino's sort of like Gardner Minshew in my mind. More times than not, he hasn't helped me out. He's hurt the team. What are your guys' initial thoughts?
Go ahead, Pops.
I feel like, while it's true there was glimpses of hope for that defense, at the end of the day, going back to the Bengals game, there were 2 touchdowns that were stripped, for the Bengals. So let's be honest, like if they took care of the ball, they're winning by 2 touchdowns, for the opening week for the Bengals. And I will say, I was surprised, that the Pats actually won it outright. They had a decent run game. I mean, Ramondre ran for what was 120, and a touchdown. So I mean, they were able to establish a run game, which is obviously going to open up the pass game, and they might be able to slip one past Seattle. I don't see it happening just because Gino, in this new system, they're still trying to work out the kinks, but they're still surrounded by all the same weapons on offense that we've talked about, and going up 2 scores on Denver, I'd see this game being very similar against New England.
Yeah, the only thing against Seattle is I think Kenneth Walker is questionable. I think he's dealing with an injury, which that's a big part of Seattle's game. They were able to run the ball very easily against Denver. But like you said, I mean, I'll take it one step further with the history thing. Like the Bengals O-line's always terrible. Burrow was running for his life. And let's be honest, like Pop said, like they were still in that game and still could have easily won it. So to me, that spells trouble for the Patriots. And I think this is a trap game with those points. Like people are going to think it's going to be closer just because it's like the Patriots beat the Bengals. And it's like, yeah, dude, but the Bengals played awful. I mean, like god awful. That's probably the worst game they play all season, and they still barely won. So even if they start shutting down the run, I mean, like you said, like their offensive line in Seattle is better than the Cincinnati's, and they have tons of weapons on the outside, which Joe Burrow was missing his weapons. You know what I mean? Like all the things that helped the Patriots beat the Bengals isn't going to exist in this game.
And
I do want to be clear. I have Seattle in the game, so hands up, don't shoot. But I mean, I'm in the same boat. Like Seattle has too much going for it as compared to Cincinnati. It will just be more interesting to me to see like can that defense of the Patriots come out and show some of the things that they did week 1. I think they'll have a good offensive game plan. And you got a young new offensive coordinator in the NFL for Seattle with Ryan Grubb and a brand new offensive, head coach. I get Mayo's the same, but Mayo learned under Belichick. It's some of that stuff does, help a team. So we'll see. Pops, do you have something else to tag on there before we go to Saints Cowboys?
Yeah, all that I was going to bring up was that, there's still questions lingering around Joe's wrist as well. And typically, where there's smoke, there's fire. So until we see that game where Joe comes out and he's just absolutely slinging the ball, and puts up 300 yards, I think there's still going to be a lot of questions of if Joe's wrist is truly healed.
For sure, and we'll get to that for I believe that's the afternoon game. So the next game is Saints Cowboys. For me, this is sort of the chance to see Derek Carr not deliver again after like a great week 1 performance, high on the Panthers. Cowboys are -6. Like I look at this game and it's got everything written about it for the Saints to get blown out in Dallas. Like that's sort of the vibe I'm getting. The total for the game's 46.5. Like I feel like Dallas could easily put that up on the Saints. Like, and I have to, as much as I hate the Cowboys, like I will, agree with Maul that this was a very good offensive team last year in the regular season. They have talent on the offense. CeeDee Lamb, you got Cooks on the outside as well. I think a big loss for them is that Ferguson's not able to play at the tight end position. Like he's a very undervalued tight end for them. But it's hard not to pick the Cowboys up until they get into the divisional round of the playoffs.
Yeah, my only takeaway from this game is going to be is the Saints defense decent or not? It was easy to look good against the Panthers, but this will be a true test for them, and we'll kind of see if they are legit or not.
Yeah, I'm looking up right now to see if Ferguson's going to play this weekend or not. Apparently, the pain's already gone, but it doesn't look like he's going to be able to play this weekend. But nothing's came out yet officially. It was just a knee sprain. So uh, I think Dak still has those pieces. And I texted you guys the first play of the game. Did you guys see Zeke hurdle that dude? It ended up being a holding penalty, so like the call came back. But Zeke hurdled somebody, and I don't think we're giving him enough credit. Like to me, he looks smaller. He looks like he lost some weight and got back into shape. And so I'm real curious to see just how he does throughout this season. And I see you guys laughing and
My man
Get
got off
ready.
that clam chowder. You
get
know?
ready to shoot me
I
down.
say it's hard for him to put any more weight on. God,
My man was trying to be Jerome Bettis up in New England.
I just remember
So-
that picture that came out last year. He was in the Patriots, and I think he had like a sweatshirt on and all that under his pads. But you're like, oh dang, the Patriots got a new old lineman. Like, who's that wearing number 20? Like, what?
It hurts. But yeah, I will give you that. I mean, he looked way better than I thought he would look
Mhm.
with the Cowboys in week 1. Then in the Cowboys same division, we get the battle for last place. We got the Giants going to the Commanders. You know, the Commanders, Jaden Daniels was able to put up some points, especially late against the Bucks. It wasn't a close game really at all. Baker looked really, really good through 4 touchdown passes. I mean, the Bucks really dominated the Giants the Commanders on all front. It's really just, I feel like Danny Dimes is fighting for his life in this game, just in terms of just being a starter and everything else, as well as the GM and the head coach. Like, I just keep going back to this point of they made a decision to pay Danny $160 million, which at the beginning of last year, we were sitting back saying this is a terrible idea. And then they let Saquon leave because they were like, well, we don't want to hand the ball off to a $40 million guy. And it's like, and now you're reaping all of those consequences. Like Maul said it multiple times last year that the Giants won games because Saquon. When Saquon wasn't in the game, the Giants looked terrible. One of 2 teams that didn't score a touchdown last week was the Giants. No Saquon, only Danny Dimes. Like, they're a bad football team. Like, I have to give the Vegas has Washington at a -1.5 point favorite. I'm on the same boat in terms of Washington winning the game just because I know the Giants are bad. They've yet to prove it.
Yeah, I think the Commanders looked better than I was expecting, but I don't think they look great by any stretch of the imagination. But again, they look better than what the Giants looked. So yeah, I'm with you. Like it should be the Commanders to lose at this point.
And I got to give Baker his props, because you guys said Washington was going to win last week, but looking at this game, I think this is a good tune-up game. This is like playing Appalachian State and your Clemson this weekend coming up, that they're able to get in and just Jaden Daniels get comfortable in that system. Maybe they're able to get Jaden getting into a rhythm and doing everything, unlike what the Bears are going to be facing this weekend going up against the Houston defense. I think this gives Jaden a little bit more, comfort in this offense and getting used to that NFL speed against a team like the Giants.
Yeah, for sure. The next game that we got Bucks going to the Lions. This one I'm a little surprised about because they have the Lions as -7.5 point favorites. I was talking to Pops before you logged on, Maul. Like, for me, the Rams were in that game the whole time. Like, until the end, it went to overtime, and the Rams were without Puka Nacua for the entire second half. It was just when before they had a punt to go into overtime, like the Rams had a play. Like, he had a drag route with Cooper Kupp. Stafford was getting pressure good on the Lions defense, but it wasn't like the Lions defense was just stopping the Rams at every turn. Like, it was a very back and forth game. And I would argue that if the Rams had gotten the football on offense, like, they probably go score. Like, it's hard to just sit back and think that the Rams weren't going to win that game. I sit back and look at this. I feel like teams are keeping being down on Baker. Like, Baker has shown that since he left Cleveland and got his opportunity with the Rams for that one game, and now that he's in Tampa Bay, like, Baker's played well, and I'll admit it. I was a doubter on him if I have any regrets immediately from the preseason picks, it was, hey, I'm going to give Atlanta the bump. I think Tampa Bay is going to be down this year, but Tampa Bay looked fantastic last week. And so did Baker. It's hard not to be high on Baker.
Yeah, I think like you said, I'm not surprised the Lions are favored just because the Lions are a good team, because I think the Rams are a good team and that was a big win for them. But I am surprised at the line, like a full touchdown there. There's like the Patriots Seahawks. I would expect this to be that kind of line. Like those lines swap essentially. You know what I mean? I would expect this to be about a 3-point game line and the other game be, a 7 full touchdown. So almost a little disrespectful to the Bucs there for having a good solid win. Maybe, they're taking into consideration that they let the Commanders score so many points and that the Lions offense is better than the Commanders, but I am surprised by the line there.
With the Lions, I did want to throw in one thing after watching last week's game. I feel like he's probably the most underrated running back in pro football right now.
David Montgomery.
Dude, that dude's
mouth.
a beast. As much hype as Jahmyr Gibbs gets, which he's good, that team's not the same without Montgomery.
No.
Dude, and I talked about this when I was watching the game with my brother and my dad of I feel like in the NFL, there's so many situations where dude, I would have called halfback dive 100 times in that game because it was working, right? But in the NFL, there's we got to get this guy his touches and we got to get this guy his touches. And I get it. You don't want to hurt David Montgomery week 1 by letting him touch the ball 40 times. But there's so many times I feel like in the NFL, things are working and they try to mix it up just because they feel like they have to, or they have to get certain guys touches. But it's dude, I would have called halfback dive with David Montgomery until they proved that they weren't going to get 4 to 5 yards every.
That's what they did in overtime. They just gave it to Montgomery. Yeah. Just said, "Go get us the win." Yeah, my man bulldozed guys.
It was working, dude. It was.
And that's the thing that ticks me off. And I understand the Bears brought in a new regime and they just had to clean house.
Here we go.
But there were two guys.
Colt McCoy didn't get hurt.
David Montgomery and Roquan Smith. All right. Those were the 2 guys that this new regime just let go. And just to see David Montgomery continue to have success, it doesn't surprise me at all because he put the Bears on his back, when Fields was first learning how to play, so I'm not surprised by his success, and I still root for him. He's on my fantasy team. I get it. He is their pound for pound guy versus Gibbs.
Next few games that we're going to discuss have an interesting line, especially not this one, but the next one for an upset pick that I didn't really see Vegas coming. This one, Indy's favored by 2.5 over the Packers. Jordan Love's not playing. And I'm not sure what Vegas is seeing, but Willis is terrible. I've never seen Willis play well. So from my standpoint, I sit back and I go, I don't know how Indy's not more of a favorite. I feel like they're putting a lot on that Packers defense to do well. But from that standpoint, you talked about it a few times, Pops, defenses get tired. And that's what I feel like is going to be the difference in this game, that if Willis can't sustain drives and get points on the board, Indy will take control. And Indy looked good last week against CJ Stroud. They only lost by 2. It was a good game. I have the Colts winning this game, but by a lot more than 2.5. I don't see Green Bay's offense getting it together, with Willis. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I thought it was pretty funny on the McAfee show. Ty Schmidt is a huge Packers fan, and he went on a diatribe about how terrible Malik Willis is. He said he'd rather have Sean Clifford calling the shots this weekend, just because of Malik Willis comes in and can't even throw a 60-yard bomb to end the game, and now he's got to lead the offense going in for the next couple of weeks. They traded for this guy, whether he's just going to be draft capital later on down the road, or if they're actually trying to keep him on board. Malik Willis just in his time with Tennessee showed that he was unable to perform at the NFL level. And now the guy played at Liberty. He had some success. I give him that. But also let's go back to who he played at Liberty. I mean, yes, he played for Hugh Freeze, but that's about all that he has for his resume. I mean, Liberty doesn't play anybody year in and year out where you're thinking, hey, this guy's got all the intangibles to be able to play. So, with all that, that's just a long-winded diatribe that he's going to be unable to lead this offense, and they're going to put it on Josh Jacobs to be able to run the ball. I would say this would be a run-heavy week, and we'll see. I mean, Houston, they're a fantastic team, but they were able to put up 27 on the Colts defense at Indianapolis. So, or 29, was it 29, 27? Anyways, they were able to put up quite a few points on that defense. So maybe that's where Vegas is leaning, and still with some question marks with AR. But dude, that bomb that he threw for 60 yards while falling back, are you kidding me?
60.
Yeah.
That ball flew 80 yards. Like,
unreal.
Yeah, off his back foot. Like,
yeah, off his back foot.
That was, yeah. The fact that that's not like starting off Sports Center every day for me, I'm like, hey, this was way bigger than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
The game that's really surprising to me is Arizona is a minus 1 point favorite over the Rams. Like, my head's scratching on this one because I know that the only thing I will give them the credit for is usually the NFC West divisional games are sort of a wild card of what happens. Like, they always seem to play one another really, really tough. But from that standpoint, like, I sit back and I look at, the Rams, like, even without Puka, like, I have them beating the Cardinals. Like, I don't understand this. Maybe I'm crazy and Vegas knows something I'm, off with. But for me, like, yeah, give me LA against the Cardinals.
Yeah, and maybe it was the success that they had against the Bills. I mean, they were up 14, but then you could argue, hey, you're up 14 against the Bills. Why weren't you able to close the game out and win the game? We saw some things where Kyler missed. Like, the one thing that they loved to show was MHJ was able to get wide open, and it would have been a touchdown had Kyler seen him on one of the first. I think he might have been the first read on that play, and so his head was already looking the other direction, and he just missed out on a wide open touchdown to MHJ, the first one of his career. But also, you brought in this guy to be that dude for your franchise, and the guy had one catch the whole entire game for 4 yards. Like, there's going to be question marks with the Arizona offense, and I just don't think that the LA defense is going to have that much of a fit with them. Detroit, at the end of the game, they only were able to score 20 points. They eventually get the touchdown in overtime to win the game. But, I mean, 20 points, like, week one against two playoff teams, like, that was a pretty decent, defensive game. And in my opinion, overall, like, both teams struggled to truly score. We saw it with the Chiefs and the Ravens game early on too. Like, these teams that are going to be playoff bound, they're just so much different and at a different caliber. If the Rams were going to the Seahawks, maybe, you would see this line that you're talking about with Vegas, but I just don't see it. Cooper Kupp switching to the Rams now. Cooper Kupp tied his most receptions of his career, on Sunday night. Like, they're dialed in. They're ready to go, and not having Puka there, I think that's only going to allow Cooper to take that role onto his back. And they've also got, Jefferson, who had some success with them last year, when Cooper and Puka were hurt for a couple of games. And they got Kyron Williams in the backfield, man. Like, I don't see what Vegas sees. And maybe, it's all the gray hairs that retired to Arizona that's going to be cheering, in the dome out there. I have no idea.
It's not. They don't have a good home team. All right, next game, we got the Steelers going to the Broncos. Right now, the Steelers are minus 2.5 point favorites. It's interesting that this goes back Maul's point, like he made it in the text, like up until someone shows that the Steelers can't be above 500 on the season, it's hard to doubt them. I like the Steelers defense. Like, Bo Nix is still Bo Nix. Like, did he get a score? Yes. Like, for most of the game, though, I think that you can make the assessment that Bo Nix wasn't, like, he didn't have a good game. Like, he had a bad game. Yeah. Anytime that I found it funny because when I was watching the game, they brought up the stat of how, John Elway was benched in his first start because he threw 4 picks, and they're like, "Oh, so not all starts are bad." And I was like, "We're really going down this pipe of comparing Bo Nix and John Elway."
Mhm.
So I look at Fields. The biggest question is Pickens caught over half of Fields' yards for the game, and the next guy up was Freiermuth, the tight end. Like the Steelers try to go get Ayuk, and now it's really showing because they don't have a number 2 wide receiver. Like the Steelers' offense, it's hurting, and really their only offense is Fields' legs, which I am sort of going down this path right now based upon what I'm seeing with the Steelers. Like I don't see Russell Wilson starting. Like I think it's right now Fields' job to lose until he has like a 3 or a 4 interception game. But if he's keeping them close and he's winning games, like Russell Wilson's going to sit on the bench. That's
Yeah,
my hot take.
Yeah, and I think that's completely valid because here we go. We got a guy that we're paying $1 million for. Because the Broncos got to pay the other 39. Like they're not gaining anything by keeping, or they're not losing anything by keeping Russ on the bench. And to bring up the whole offense thing, like what I saw out of the Steelers this week reminded me a lot of last season as a Bears fan. Like it was DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. Now switch it to the Steelers. It's Pickens and it's Freiermuth. Like it's the same exact scheme that we had in Chicago because that's what Fields can do. Fields can roll out on the run on those bootlegs and make the toss. Like anything other than that is questionable because you got to give him the option to run the ball as well. And that's what it ends up. Like he ends up making a bad mistake to where they can't keep moving the ball and they have to kick the field goal. That's all we did last year as the Bears. We'd get across the 50 and then, we get into field goal range. We're not able to convert on third down. Here comes a field goal. And, that's how we're losing games. Like eventually I think it's going to creep up. I don't see it this week being in Denver. It would have been cool. Maybe Russ was able to get some revenge on the Broncos. Hey, you're paying me $39 million and I just beat you. But I don't think we're going to see it. And yeah, just like you said, if Fields wins this game, I think Russ is done.
And we've been talking history all episode, and if history is going to prove anything, it's a former Bears player leaving the Bears and then doing well. So, like Justin Fields is, again, I think he's in an okay situation. You make it sound like a negative, like he's really only got Pickens and then Freiermuth, but like again, Fields' legs is really that like extra body that now the defense has to worry about. Their defense is good enough that they're able to get away with that. So there's going to be some, we'll see, right? Like again, and I don't think anybody's really expecting the Steelers to like be this powerhouse, but like they can go 500 again easily. I think just based on like a solid defense, they are going to protect Fields better than the Bears did, which gives him a little bit of time. And then he's got his legs that can, as long as he doesn't have those like terrible Fields type games like he had last year. He had amazing games last year with the Bears, but then he also had like really bad games. So I think as long as he doesn't have like one of those just really, really bad games and they're kind of continuing to either stay in games or win games like they did last week, like in my opinion, there's no reason to start Russ because you kind of know what you've got right now.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of them going over 500, part of that will be division wins. And right now, I don't see the Bengals beating anybody. The Bengals are going to the Chiefs. Kansas City's only -5.5, which, yet again, some of these like early odds are just surprising to me because Spag with the Kansas City defense, how good the Chiefs looked last week, like, and how bad the Bengals offensive line was. And their defense could not stop the run. Like, Ramondre Stevenson was absolutely tanking those dudes, especially at the end of the game. They could not, trying to get a defensive stop to give Burrow the ball back with sort of like a false hope that he was going to drive him down the field and win them a game. They couldn't do it. And I sit back and I look at Pacheco. You look at how they used Worthy last week on the edge, like with that, reverse pass or handoff, however you want to call it, and then his downfield touchdown. Like, I got the Chiefs by more than a touchdown in this game.
Yeah, again, another very surprising line. There's a lot of surprising lines this week, and I don't know if it's just week 2 and Vegas is just not sure on a lot of people, but I get it. The Bengals Chiefs is always kind of this like, ooh, could be an AFC Championship matchup, but I haven't seen it this year. And I know we're only going off of a 1 week, what we're looking a 1 week sample here, but the Bengals looked rough.
Yeah, and I think this is where history kind of plays in negatively, because everybody called it Burrowhead there for a while, because he was undefeated in the stadium. But like we've already alluded to it, it's just not going to happen this week. I think, Spags' defense, is it's unreal. You've got a head coach potential guy sitting there calling. All he has to do is call defense. It was like Dan Quinn calling, the Cowboys for the last couple of seasons. Like, it's almost unfair to have a guy of that caliber sitting in that seat, and he's just able to sit back and just have fun because all he's got to do is answer for the defense. And they're going to get that pressure up to Chris Jones. I could see him having 2.5, maybe 3 sacks. Especially with his offensive line struggles that they're having.
I was supposed to say, unless all of a sudden they got an entire new offensive line and then Higgins and Chase both come back 100% healthy, which I don't see any of that happening in the next few days. Chiefs should be more than a touchdown favorite.
My favorite meme page, as well as your guys' NFL memes, just posted this article that Bengals cornerback Taylor Britt, not concerned about Xavier Worthy. Speed, that's about it. That's on the quote. And I'm like, all right, well, I feel even more comfortable. Chiefs by double digits.
Dude's getting torched for an 80-yarder guaranteed.
Yeah.
Worthy's going to have 3 touchdowns over 50 yards.
Ooh, the other big news that they just dropped 47 minutes ago, there's video footage of Deshaun Watson's latest alleged sexual assault.
Woof.
Which, if that's true, like I feel like we have to skip to this real quick. Like, the Browns have the ability to get out of the rest of his guaranteed money because they wrote into the contract, like, hey, if there's something new, we have the ability to not pay you and to pretty much cut ties. For me, this is like God sending the lifeboat to be like, hey, I've given you so many chances. This is the last one. You're going to die. Get on the boat. And for me, get on. Like, if they don't can him from this, because it will be his last opportunity. Like, if the Browns get rid of him, he's not going to go play for any other team. He hasn't been good. So
I could see the investigation coming out that the Browns set this whole thing up and it was entrapment just so they could try to get rid of him. They've been looking for a reason.
That would be the best thing the Browns have ever done. Like, they have a history of losing, and finally the Browns were like, no more. We're going to set this dude up. All right, Pops, I'm going to turn it over to you. Sunday Night Football, Bears at the Texans, Houston's -6.5.
Yeah.
How bad are your Bears going to lose?
I think we keep it within just because the defense.
Within 6.5?
I do.
Okay.
I'm confident. What I saw of that defense last week was just absolutely phenomenal. Like, I understand, like, it was against the Titans, but I mean, dude, I want to see some progression. The worst part that I hate, if we're going to go into it, is that we didn't fix the offensive line. Like, yes, you can go back and look like, hey, we picked up this guy, we picked up that guy, but they were all bench dudes, and we were able to get them cheap. Like, we spent all the money where we needed to with Keenan, with DJ, with DeAndre, paying those guys to come to the team. Jalen got a new contract. Like, all these guys got the money that they needed, but we didn't fix the one thing that, got Fields ran out of town, was the offensive line. And Caleb cannot have that as a young guy. I think this week is going to be the inverse of what we saw with Jaden Daniels. Like, Jaden goes from a very good team to playing a bad team. He gets that tune-up game. We went from playing a bad team to now we're going to have to play a good team. And I just don't see I think the defense is able to hold C.J. Stroud in that pass. I would be concerned about the run game a little bit. But I think the pass game, we're able to lock them down between Stevenson, Brisker, and Jalen Johnson out there. The question will be, what Caleb shows up. Is Shane Waldron able to give Caleb the plays necessary to get him going in a rhythm? Like, there was that rhythm that ended up to Keenan dropping a touchdown. That whole drive, Caleb was getting on a roll. And then the very next drive, he looked all out of sorts again. It's just like, you got to give this guy something to stand on. And oh, by the way, we didn't get DeAndre Swift involved early. And it's just like, what are we doing? You got a very good running back. You know, I didn't say he was the top tier guy. He was like, you know, the next guy down. He'd be your running back too, you know, for your fantasy team. And it's just like, you're not getting this guy involved either. And it's not helping us. So I think they keep it. I don't think within, you know, the 6.5, but I think the Houston Texans are going to win this game.
I feel like I'm about to tell someone Santa Claus isn't real. The Bears were losing double digits to the Titans. Like, and it took a block punt for 6 and a pick 6 for the Bears to get even and then pull ahead there at the end. Like, Will Levis isn't coming. They're not playing Will Levis again. Like, and speaking of a running game, Mixon went off. Like, Mixon had 160 yards against the Colts. Like, I'm sorry, but I think the Texans just absolutely shellacked the Bears. Like, their defense, they got Daniel Hunter, they got Will Anderson. Like, they have a defensive line. The Bears did not look good on that offensive line front. Like, that, I hated the Bears offensive play calling. Like, all the times that they had the ability to like sort of get CW in rhythm, it was like, it didn't help. That was like Swift was literally getting the ball handed off to him and like tackled 4 yards for loss. It's like you went from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 14. Like, they went behind the stick so much. Like, I just sit back and look at this game and it's like, I don't have a good vibe for the Bears.
Yeah, that was my biggest thing is the play calling seemed very poor, but I think ultimately what it came down to was that line. Like, the play calling was predicated on like we were going to have time and we were going to get some type of rhythm going with the run game. Like, and because none of those things happened, all of a sudden it was a scramble of just like, oh my gosh, what do we do? So now they're trying to like work from behind the sticks or have Caleb, you know, do things that they weren't necessarily trying to, you know, going and game planning for it. And that was like the big surprise of just like, man, they're going to be in trouble for sure if that O-line can't get it together, because it's just too much to ask of Caleb to do anything when he's scrambling, running for his life. I mean, you saw like in college, he was able to get away with a lot of that stuff, which just made him look fantastic. But like, he's not going to have that same escapability in the pros. Dudes are just too good, and he can't be taking those like 20-yard lost sacks either. Like that's just unacceptable on so many different levels. So, if that O-line doesn't step up, it's going to put a lot of people in a panic real quick, which I think is only just going to increase the pressure of like,
on Caleb.
Yeah, exactly. Like this we had to be good because like otherwise we're a bust, and it's just going to like start manifesting in ways that I don't think Bears fans want to see.
Sorry, Pop, Santa Claus.
Oh, you're good. Y'all good.
Final game, you got the Falcons going to the Eagles. I mean, we sort of talked about it earlier with Rodgers of how Cousins looked bad.
He looked
like
bad.
I honestly, like, throughout that game, because I had it on here, I was sitting back and I was like, maybe drafting Penix wasn't a bad idea. Like, because like he looked awful. Like, and he didn't look anything like he did last year. Like, from a mobility standpoint, anything. Now, I get it. Like, I would go back to what I told you, Pops. Like, my dad, it was funny because we took my daughter to the Falcons at the last preseason game. That way she got to go see a stadium. It was a cool first experience. But when I told my dad that, he was like, dude, Jacksonville just murdered him. And I was like, yeah, like Tyler Heineke was trying to die every single play out there on the field. But then my dad was like, did you see the post game? I was like, no, we had already left. And he was like, Falcons coach was laughing. Like, it was like no big deal that they had just gotten smacked in their last preseason game. He was like, yeah, we'll figure it out. That's what the preseason's about. Huh? And it was like, he was laughing about TJ Watt before the game. And then TJ Watt destroyed them throughout the whole game, like calls forced fumbles, sacks. Like, he ruined their offensive game plan. And I sit back and I look at the Eagles, like, yes, the Eagles defensively have work to do, but it's like, this is still I think they're better than the Steelers, like, especially on offense. Like, if Caleb, or if Fields is slinging at the Pickens and Fields only has Najee, that offense of the Eagles, like I just sort of sit back. Philly's a 6.5 point favorite, but God bless.
Yeah, I promise you they're going to do more than 6 field goals. Like I promise you the Eagles are going to do more than 6 field goals.
Yeah, for sure. What else do you guys got on the game?
I mean, I just think, Kirk not playing in the preseason, like there were also you saw a couple of weird steps that he was taking, not able to really plant. Like there's some question marks. Maybe his rehab, he wasn't doing ayahuasca with Aaron and J.K. Dobbins. So maybe that's what it was. They got into the spiritual journey and were able to figure out how to recover from it. But I mean, Kirk looked bad, and it's only going to get worse because, hey, you're playing probably the same, if not a better defense. Now, TJ and Cam Hayward, like you can't, those guys are definitely probably going to be TJ for sure, Hall of Famer. Cam Hayward, you can make an argument for being a Hall of Famer. But now you're also bringing in a very good defensive line for the Eagles that have a secondary behind them. Like, it's going to be tough for Kirk to get any better, to find any sort of rhythm if he played any sorts of how he did last week. And how are we using Bijan and all the other guys that he has around him if he can't get them the ball? So definitely some question marks there in Atlanta, which it's making Tampa Bay look good. And I think the Eagles offense is going to continue to roll. Like, it's hard to stop. Like, Saquon had 3 touchdowns last week, and, you got A.J. Brown and Devontae, like, and then Dallas Goedert when all those guys are covered up. Like, good luck.
Yeah, Bijan was their one bright spot. He clearly looks like he fits the role that everybody's putting him in. But again, he's not going to single-handedly win you any games, especially if you're their defense did okay, but like they're gonna face teams here that they're not gonna be able to get away with any of that. So,
on a side note, since you brought up Aaron Rodgers and that, I
Ayahuasca.
saw probably one of the best I always thought the Waffle House, 24 hours in a Waffle House, and every waffle you eat is, knocks off an hour of punishment. I think it's been one up by the new next best fantasy punishment, which you got to go spend a day in the dark room like Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't know why, but that to me, like, I'm just like, dude, that would absolutely suck to just sit in the dark being like, dude, I'm getting this Aaron Rodgers treatment right now because I came in dead last in fantasy. Honestly, I'm not in a fantasy league this year, but if I played with a bunch of boys, I'd probably argue that should be the fantasy punishment, to go spend a whole 24 hours in a dark room. That way, when you get out, your wife's also yelling at you for being gone for 24 hours because you suck at fantasy. But that wraps up week 2. You guys got any other final thoughts before we end this episode?
Nope, it was a good week.
All right. Well, time to pull chalks. We'll see you guys next time.